Trade reports continue to escalate surrounding the Milwaukee Bucks as a recent report has come out revealing a trade between the Milwaukee Bucks and the San Antonio Spurs surrounding recently drafted rookie AJ Johnson. So we're going to break down the exact trade and discuss what it could mean going forward. It's quite frankly, it is a bit ridiculous. So stay tuned for all that in this episode. But before we do, if you're a part of the 86 or so percent who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place you're going to want to be for daily Bucks content. And we're super close to 1,000 subscribers. So if you're part of the 86%, do myself a favor and scroll down and hit that subscribe button for me. We have a lot to go over today. Obviously, trade rumors are continuing to escalate surrounding the Milwaukee Bucks. Obviously, Pat Connaughton's name has been brought up a lot. We have now recently drafted AJ Johnson's name being brought up in trade talks with the San Antonio Spurs, and the trade is a little bit ridiculous, and I want to get all your guys' thoughts on it as these trade rumors are going to continue to happen, especially for the Milwaukee Bucks as they deal with a lot of controversy after last season's disappointment, change of scenery, everything. They got a lot of new additions in the offseason, but will they be able to execute is the biggest question. And as a result, tons of trade rumors are going down. So you can see this here. San Antonio Spurs could make a mid-season trade with the Milwaukee Bucks. If the season goes according to plan for the Spurs, they could shop Chris Paul before the trade deadline. Now, this trade is more so looking to the future a little bit at the deadline, and it does make some sense, but I think that the Milwaukee Bucks would probably run away from this trade, but we're going to dive into it. And it is centered around Chris Paul and, as I discussed earlier, AJ Johnson. So you see this here, the San Antonio Spurs, we all know they signed Chris Paul to a one-year deal, basically to help catapult their rebuild a little bit and give Victor Wembanyama an actual point guard to help propel his growth this upcoming season. And the question mark is now, you obviously know that the San Antonio Spurs have Stephon Castle, who needs time to develop at the NBA level. So Chris Paul will be the starting point guard in the meantime for them. The point of this is, if Castle continues to development and breaks out, a trade could go down between the Bucks and the Spurs, because you can see here, as we all know, unfortunately, the Milwaukee Bucks don't have much in the way of trade draft capital, but they did just rookie point guard AJ Johnson. He was selected 23rd, and we'll dive into that pick and all those things. We can see the proposed trade here at the bottom. The Spurs would send out Chris Paul and City Sissoko, it's a very difficult name to pronounce, for AJ Johnson and Pat Connaughton. So this is super intriguing to me. Now, I think if you're the Milwaukee Bucks and you're a Bucks fan, you're probably thinking no way, and I tend to agree. I don't think there's a way that the Bucks would do this trade unless some unforeseen events happen, which we'll dive into here. But looking at it from kind of just on a surface level, you're getting Chris Paul and you're giving away AJ Johnson and Pat Connaughton. Now, Pat Connaughton is a very interesting name. We know we've discussed fans want him gone anyways. We discussed a trade very recently, exchanging Pat Connaughton for Cody Martin, and that one was a bit more realistic. This one, you're giving away a prospect in AJ Johnson who was recently drafted. We know that when he was drafted 23rd overall for the Milwaukee Bucks at the time, a lot of Bucks fans were outraged. Draft analysts were saying, why did he get picked in the first round, let alone at the 23rd pick? In Australia, we know he averaged around 2 points a game, but he came out and in the summer league looked very promising, very good, especially it was very encouraging, especially for a Bucks team that doesn't have too many great prospects. They don't have a ton of draft capital. They're obviously in win now mode. They made the Dame trade. They have Giannis. They signed a bunch of guys, more veteran players. I mean, they got Gary Trent Jr. He's not really necessarily a veteran, but he's been around for a while. And now you're looking at the Bucks trying to compete. And the reason that the Bucks would do this trade, I'm going to go on I'll kind of play both sides here, is we know that Dame has been battling with injuries. And if he continues to be, let's say he plays 50 or 60 games, or as you're approaching the trade deadline, Damian Lillard is still battling with injuries, and say he only plays 20, 25 games, and he's out for a little bit with injuries, and you need someone to man that backup point guard role. And obviously they signed DeLon Wright in the offseason, but if you want a guy, and let's say DeLon Wright's not performing, he's doing his job, but he is not necessarily a phenomenal backup, or definitely not a starting point guard in this league at this point in DeLon Wright's career, as he's in his early 30s now. But if you get Chris Paul, who's a veteran guy, he's won before, he's been around, it's basically very good insurance for if Damian Lillard ultimately is hurt or gets hurt. Because we saw last year, once Dame got hurt, I mean, especially in the playoffs, Dame and Giannis, but once Dame got hurt, the Bucks team started to unravel and fall apart a little bit. And by getting Chris Paul, you'd be able to pair Giannis with another veteran point guard who could help kind of just ride the ship until Damian Lillard either returns or gets fully healthy. Now, this is obviously assuming an injury. Now, I'm not saying that Damian Lillard is going to get hurt necessarily. We do know that he's had concerns over the past few years. We saw it especially last year. But at the very least, let's say Damian Lillard is healthy and you're making this trade. You have Chris Paul to help man your second unit, and then that slides DeLon right down to either playing some odd two guard or into the third, kind of just third string point guard. But the problem with this trade is it's a lot of what ifs. I don't know if the Bucks would necessarily be going out and shopping for a point guard unless Dame is dealing with some severe injury and it continues to plague him like it did last year. Because if you're giving up AJ Johnson, you're already not a super young team, and you managed to seemingly, at least based on the summer league, get a very good pick in AJ Johnson. I don't know if you're the Bucks management, that you want to throw that player away when he's only 19 years old in exchange for a veteran point guard, Chris Paul, unless you're very sure you're going to win now and that you need him. If this season starts and DeLon Wright goes out and he does an adequate job as your backup point guard, to the point where maybe he could even slide in to a spot start at the starting point guard position if Dame goes down for a few games, I don't think they're going to prioritize getting a guy like Chris Paul. I think they're going to prioritize some other needs at the deadline. Now, what that is up in the air, whether it could be anything. Whether it is a backup point guard that's not Chris Paul, it's cheaper, a backup center, depending on what happens. Maybe, Bobby Portis has a rough year, depending on what happens, or Brook Lopez. Some stuff, unforeseen events, is going to come up, and I just find it hard to believe that their priority is going to be getting a backup point guard when they already have Damian Lillard, and they do have recently signed DeLon Wright. It's a tough sell for me if I'm a Milwaukee Bucks fan. And you're also giving up Pat Connaughton, who, even though he had a very, very rough playoff run last season, shooting 20% from three or averaging 3 points a game in the playoffs, he's still a fairly solid 3-and-D wing for the regular season. And even if he doesn't perform in the playoffs, this trade would, in theory, happen at the deadline. So you still need guys to help you get the, whether it's the 1 seed, the 2 seed, the 3 seed in the East, because the East is still a very strong division, a strong conference, sorry. And obviously the Boston Celtics are going to, in theory, be fighting for that number 1 spot and probably be the favorite to do it. You still need guys. So you're giving up AJ Johnson and Pat Connaughton. It's a hard sell, especially with how high fans are, and I assume management, on AJ Johnson, because keep in mind, at the time of the draft, not many teams were even considering drafting AJ Johnson with the 23rd, or even in the first round, because obviously the Bucks had the 23rd pick. The other teams wouldn't be considering it. But the Bucks management saw something, and what they saw has paid dividends so far in the summer league. So it's going to be very, very interesting. And then there's also, of course, the other piece of this trade, which is Sissoko, who could be an interesting piece for the Bucks as well. But if you're the Bucks, I'm not sure how much room he would be able to get to grow. But one thing that does happen out of this trade, you are getting some cap space. And of course, Pat Connaughton has a player option in 2025, 2026. You'd be clearing up a bit of cap space. You'd be giving up, obviously, one of your young players. But I'm very curious to see what you guys think about this in the comment section. But basically, you're giving up Pat Connaughton and AJ Johnson, a young piece and a guy who a lot of Bucks fans are kind of fed up with. You're getting a veteran point guard, but I feel like the Bucks will have some other priorities come trade deadline time if this trade ultimately happens. And I also think that they would rather package a guy like Pat Connaughton in a different trade for a different asset. But let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on this. We'll see you soon.